The ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, reflecting off the polished marble floors in waves of golden light. Victoria Hale stood at the center of it all, a vision of power and elegance in a tailored emerald gown that hugged her figure with perfect precision. Tonight was hers, the celebration of a $600 million deal that would cement her status as one of New York's most formidable CEOs. The room buzzed with executives, investors, and journalists, all eyes subtly or not so subtly fixed on her. She basked in the attention, every smile and raised glass a testament to her ambition realized. Yet amidst the glittering crowd stood Ethan Greyson, calm and composed in his dark suit, hands loosely clasped behind his back. He had always been understated, the quiet presence beside Victoria's relentless radiance. But there was a depth in his gaze that many overlooked, a calm reservoir of observation and unspoken power. Tonight, however, he was to be Victoria's foil, the unwitting actor in her display of triumph. Victoria's lips curved into a confident, almost cruel smile as she raised the bottle of champagne. "To success, and to all those who underestimated us," she declared, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. A few polite claps echoed, mingling with the clinking of glasses. Then, in a move calculated to draw gasps, she tilted the bottle, letting golden liquid cascade over Ethan's shoulders. His tie darkened, his crisp white shirt now marred with stains, and the room collectively inhaled. Some hid smiles behind hands, others exchanged awkward glances. But all eyes were fixed on him. "You really thought you'd amount to more than a simple engineer?" Victoria taunted, her voice sharp, yet melodically refined. Laughter rippled through the crowd, a mixture of amusement and schadenfreude. Victoria's heart swelled with satisfaction, a surge of triumph at her audacity. This, she thought, was the pinnacle of her power, both professional and personal. Ethan's silence was exactly what she wanted. It underscored his inferiority. Or so she believed. But Ethan's expression betrayed nothing. The corners of his mouth didn't twitch in embarrassment, nor did his hands fidget nervously. Instead, there was a faint tightening in his jaw, and his dark eyes glimmered with a subtle intensity. A secret Victoria could not perceive. He was not humiliated, at least not in the way she intended. Within the calm exterior, an entire world of calculations and quiet power thrummed beneath the surface. Victoria, blinded by the adulation around her, could not sense the storm gathering in the stillness beside her. Guests murmured, glasses clinking as they took sips of champagne, uncertain whether to sympathize with Ethan or to indulge in Victoria's display. Journalists scribbled notes, already imagining headlines that would portray the event as a scandalous triumph. The tension in the room was tangible, like the crackle before a storm, though Victoria remained oblivious, her eyes sparkling with untempered pride. Ethan finally straightened, his posture impeccable, and gave a subtle nod toward Victoria, a nod that could be mistaken for submission, but carried a different weight entirely. In that single, measured gesture, he conveyed awareness, composure, and an unspoken warning. The audience saw only a man drenched in champagne, humbled by his wife's audacity. But behind the polished veneer, Ethan's mind was a chessboard of possibilities, each move deliberate, each thought a shield against the world's perception. Victoria laughed, a rich, clear sound, fully convinced of her victory. She had staged the perfect moment. The luxurious setting, the public spectacle, the humiliation of the man she believed to be beneath her. And yet, the quiet beneath Ethan's gaze whispered a truth she could not yet understand. Power was never what it appeared to be, and triumph could be as fragile as glass in the wrong hands. As the night progressed, Victoria continued her toast, oblivious to the subtle glances Ethan exchanged with certain key attendees, subtle nods, and slight inclinations of the head that hinted at alliances, information, and influence far beyond what she imagined. Every gesture, every conversation he navigated silently, built a contrast against the clamor and chaos of her celebration. The golden liquid running down his shirt reflected the chandelier lights, glimmering almost like a halo. But beneath it lay the weight of secrets Victoria had yet to uncover. In her mind, she had won. In reality, the first move in a game far larger than any champagne-stained spectacle had already been made. Victoria's self-satisfied smile masked the vulnerability she did not see. The quiet, deliberate power of a man underestimated. The storm gathering silently behind calm eyes. Tonight, she celebrated victory. Tomorrow, the rules of the game might very well shift in ways she could never anticipate. The city skyline stretched across the window, the evening lights of New York sparkling like 1,000 distant stars. In the quiet of his private office, Ethan Greyson removed his jacket and draped it over the back of a leather chair, shedding the image of the understated husband Victoria publicly humiliated just hours ago. The room was sleek and modern, minimalist yet powerful, a reflection of the empire Ethan had been constructing in silence. His office, hidden high above the chaos of the city, was a world Victoria had never glimpsed, one in which he wielded influence, negotiated quietly, and observed the pulse of the market with surgical precision. Ethan poured himself a glass of aged bourbon, watching the amber liquid catch the soft glow of the desk lamp. He reflected on the evening's spectacle. Victoria's triumphant display, her laughter ringing through the grand ballroom. The gasps of the attendees as champagne soaked his suit. The humiliation she thought she inflicted had no weight on him, though it revealed something fascinating about her. Her need to assert dominance, to be seen, to be celebrated. Ethan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Power, he mused, often hid behind the quietest faces. While Victoria basked in applause and accolades, Ethan had been steadily orchestrating deals, acquisitions, and alliances that would secure his influence across multiple industries. The difference between the man the world saw and the man he truly was could not have been starker. Victoria's focus on social triumphs, her parties, her public image, her carefully curated social media presence kept her blind to the breadth of Ethan's operations. Every conference call, every confidential meeting, every subtle handshake was a step toward consolidating authority that she had never imagined he could wield. A soft knock at the door broke Ethan from his contemplation. One of his trusted associates entered quietly, bearing reports that summarized the latest strategic moves. A minor acquisition in renewable energy, a quietly influential stake in a tech startup, and several key personnel shifts designed to strengthen his position. Everything proceeding according to plan, the associate whispered, barely audible over the hum of the city below. Ethan nodded once, barely acknowledging the words, his mind already calculating the ripple effects. Meanwhile, Victoria, oblivious to the intricate web being spun beside her, sent celebratory messages and engaged in light banter with colleagues about the evening's success. Yet beneath her composed exterior, a subtle tension began to rise. She noticed Ethan's unusual calm, the flicker of something in his eyes during the champagne incident that she could not place. A nagging thought crept into her mind. Was there more to him than the quiet engineer she had long dismissed? She shook it off, attributing the feeling to fatigue and the residual adrenaline of her triumph. Ethan, in contrast, was attuned to every minor shift in Victoria's behavior. He had always known her ambitions, her pride, her need to dominate. Watching her celebrate publicly while he maneuvered quietly behind the scenes offered both insight and amusement. He understood the fragile equilibrium of appearances, how easily a person could be confident in their own power while being blind to the forces quietly shaping their fate. Hours passed as Ethan moved through encrypted messages, confidential memos, and discreet communications with business partners, each interaction meticulous and measured. He considered the optics of the evening, Victoria's growing visibility, and the potential consequences should anyone realize the depth of his own influence. The thought of revealing the truth now seemed unnecessary. There was a satisfaction in allowing her to remain unaware, in letting her operate under the illusion that she alone controlled their shared narrative. Victoria's phone buzzed intermittently, notifications from colleagues praising her poise and dominance at the event. She smiled faintly, though an unfamiliar unease tugged at the edges of her consciousness. Something was shifting, though she could not yet identify it. Ethan's calm, the subtle power behind his presence, and the whispers of influence she had never noticed before, all contributed to a growing sense of uncertainty. She began to question whether her triumph was truly absolute, or whether she had underestimated the man she married. Ethan finally set his glass down, leaning back in the chair, his gaze resting on the skyline that stretched endlessly before him. The city thrummed with life, but within the quiet confines of the office, he was the one who controlled the narrative. Outside, Victoria celebrated her victory, oblivious that the foundation of her world was quietly shifting beneath her feet. The first hints of imbalance had appeared, and the subtle tension between what she knew and what he controlled would only grow more pronounced in the days to come. In the calm of his private empire, Ethan smiled again, faintly, deliberately, a smile that promised the revelation of secrets yet to come. The days following the champagne celebration brought an unexpected weight to Victoria Hale's world. The applause and admiration that had filled the grand ballroom seemed distant now, replaced by a subtle, gnawing tension. Partners who had once celebrated her skillful negotiation began sending cautious emails, questioning timelines, budgets, and projections. Minor delays in production escalated into noticeable setbacks, and whispers of concern threaded through boardroom conversations. Victoria felt the cracks forming, a stark contrast to the image of unshakable authority she had so carefully cultivated. Ethan remained quiet, his demeanor unchanged as he attended to his own intricate web of business affairs. Behind closed doors, he subtly influenced the flow of decisions, adjusting strategies, offering advice through intermediaries, and ensuring that the most critical elements of their shared empire remained intact. To Victoria, he appeared passive, almost absent, yet the shadows of his interventions were everywhere, unseen but undeniably present. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down harder, the realization creeping in that leadership was not just about visibility, applause, or charisma. It was about foresight, subtle influence, and control over the smallest variables. Victoria spent long hours in her office, pacing between sleek desks and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city below. She pored over spreadsheets, projections, and reports, trying to reconcile the growing list of issues with the confidence she projected in public. Her assistant, sensing the rising tension, left the office with polite excuses, leaving Victoria alone with the hum of computers and the distant sounds of traffic far below. She noticed Ethan's absence from the public eye, his silence in meetings, and the quiet efficiency with which certain problems seemed to resolve themselves without her intervention. A small, insidious doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she overestimated her control, her power, her knowledge? Emails from partners arrived with subtle but unmistakable undertones of skepticism. One project, an international collaboration with a rising design firm, faced unexpected regulatory hurdles. Another, a domestic venture involving luxury retail expansion, encountered logistical problems that no one had anticipated. Victoria fielded calls and video conferences, her tone professional, her exterior calm, but inside, a storm of anxiety and self-recrimination raged. She began to question not just the loyalty of her colleagues, but her own judgment, the decisions she had made, and the assumptions that had guided her rise to prominence. Ethan, observing from his quiet sphere of influence, saw the subtle shifts in Victoria's demeanor. He noted the slight furrow of her brow, the tension in her shoulders, the way she lingered over reports long after the meetings had ended. Each signal was a thread in the tapestry of her growing awareness that power was never merely a matter of public recognition. He allowed her these moments of unease, knowing that understanding often comes through observation, reflection, and the confrontation of uncomfortable truths. His interventions were strategic, invisible, and measured not to undermine, but to reveal the depth of a reality she had yet to comprehend. In the evenings, Victoria walked the corridors of her penthouse apartment, the city lights reflecting off polished floors and glass walls, a mirror to her own inner turmoil. The celebrations, the laughter, the champagne, all seemed a distant echo, replaced by the silence of responsibility and the relentless scrutiny of expectation. She caught herself thinking of Ethan in passing moments, his composure, his rare interjections, his understated competence, and felt a twinge of unease. Something about him had shifted, or perhaps she had simply failed to notice it all along. The realization was subtle but insistent. She might not truly know the man she shared her life with. A crucial meeting with major investors loomed, And Victoria felt the sting of vulnerability for the first time in years. Her confidence, once solid as granite, now had fissures, and every decision, every word, every gesture would be scrutinized. She was beginning to understand that leadership was an intricate game, that visibility was only a fraction of true authority, and that some battles were waged silently, away from applause and admiration. The cracks in her empire were not catastrophic yet, but they were undeniable, and the deeper truths of her marriage and professional life were beginning to surface. By the time the night fell, Victoria sat alone in her office, lights dimmed, documents spread around her like the pieces of a complex puzzle. She traced patterns, connections, and consequences. And while the visible world seemed intact, the undercurrents of influence, controlled by Ethan, became ever more apparent. She was no longer the sole architect of her destiny. Someone else's quiet hand was shaping the very foundation she had believed was entirely hers. And in that quiet moment, Victoria Hale felt, for the first time, a profound unease that hinted at the challenges and revelations to come. Victoria sat in the quiet corner of a sleek, modern cafe, her laptop open, but her attention fragmented. The celebratory champagne, the applause, the laughter from the previous week, all of it felt distant, almost irrelevant. She was no longer simply the CEO celebrating a deal. She was a wife navigating a revelation that threatened to upend everything she believed about her life. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she began to trace Ethan's network, scanning press releases, corporate filings, and industry chatter. At first, the details seemed minor. Small investments here, strategic partnerships there. But as the hours passed, the picture sharpened with unsettling clarity. Ethan Greyson, the man she had mocked as unambitious, controlled a web of businesses that touched every corner of the luxury design world, finance, and technology ventures. Companies that she had assumed were under her influence had, in reality, been quietly aligned with him. The foundation of her professional triumphs, she realized with growing dread, rested in part on decisions over which she had no control. Victoria leaned back, her breath shallow. A knot of disbelief and betrayal coiled in her stomach. She had spent years building her career, celebrating victories in glittering boardrooms, believing that her skill, her vision, and her ambition were the engines driving her success. And yet here was Ethan, silent, unseen, orchestrating a network that rivaled and sometimes surpassed her own achievements. The magnitude of it struck her like a blow. She had never truly seen him. Not the man she married. Not the force he had become. Her mind replayed the moments of public humiliation, the champagne cascading over his crisp shirt, her taunts, the applause of her colleagues. At the time, she had felt triumphant, confident, untouchable. But now, with the hidden empire coming into view, those memories felt hollow, almost absurd. She realized that her sense of superiority had been based on ignorance, and the humiliation she thought she had inflicted had been nothing more than a superficial display in the face of genuine, quiet power. A sense of fear mingled with fascination. She imagined Ethan navigating boardrooms, his presence commanding respect, his decisions shaping markets, while she focused on appearances. The duality of his life, silent dominance versus the understated husband she knew, felt like a revelation that could fracture her world. Every question she had about his past, his motives, and the choices that led him here pressed against her thoughts relentlessly. Could she have ever truly understood him? Or had she only known the version of him that suited her perception, the one she could ridicule without consequence? Victoria's phone buzzed, a reminder of a meeting she had scheduled with a potential investor. She opened the message, only to find that Ethan had already preemptively addressed certain concerns, smoothing over negotiations that could have become contentious. His fingerprints were everywhere, subtle but undeniable. The realization was almost paralyzing. Her independence, her authority, even her perception of control, had been overlaid atop a structure Ethan had meticulously built, and she had been oblivious to it. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the laptop. A wave of shame swept over her, not for her ambition, but for the arrogance and blindness that had kept her from seeing the man beside her for who he truly was. The man she had dismissed publicly as lacking ambition now held the kind of influence that could eclipse her most celebrated achievements. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet irresistibly drawn to the complexity of the truth. As night fell over New York, Victoria walked alone along the terrace of her apartment, the city lights sprawling endlessly before her. Each glowing window, each distant street, seemed to echo the revelation she carried within herself. Power was not always visible, and the foundations of life and marriage could be built in silence, far from public view. For the first time, she saw Ethan not as her subordinate, not as her husband in the way she had trivialized him, but as a man of immense influence and quiet mastery. And with that understanding came a stark, inescapable question. Had she ever truly known the person she married? Or had she simply crafted a version of him to fit her own expectations? The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of secrets and the tremor of betrayal, as Victoria Hale confronted a reality that would redefine everything she thought she understood about her life, her marriage, and the man she had once believed she knew completely. Victoria Hale's days became a delicate balance of assertion and calculation. Each morning she entered her office. She carried the confidence of a woman who had conquered markets, secured deals, and captivated boardrooms. But beneath that veneer, an invisible hand seemed to shadow every move. Ethan Greyson's presence was always felt, even when he was physically absent. He anticipated her strategies, preempted her negotiations, and subtly redirected outcomes without a word. Victoria could sense it in the way clients' positions shifted, in the whispered assurances from executives who seemed unnervingly aligned with his quiet influence. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, or perhaps her own misperception. But the signs accumulated. Contracts she thought she had secured were amended subtly by partners before her eyes. Meetings she had meticulously prepared for unfolded in ways she had not foreseen, as though someone else had set the stage. Victoria began to feel both irritation and awe, the tension twisting inside her as she realized the breadth of Ethan's control. Her pride battled her disbelief. How could the man she had dismissed so easily exert such silent authority? Ethan remained an enigma. He did not confront her, did not issue commands, did not gloat. Instead, he maintained a serene composure, attending social events with a polite smile, observing, guiding, and manipulating from behind a veil of civility. Every alliance he nurtured, every subtle nod to a partner, every discreet message in the right hands, reinforced the reality Victoria could no longer ignore. She had entered a battlefield where appearances were deceptive, where influence was measured in subtleties, and where the rules were written by someone she had underestimated. Social interactions became tense arenas. At charity galas and networking events, Victoria noticed the way colleagues and partners exchanged knowing glances, the hints of loyalty or caution in their words. Small betrayals surfaced, confidential plans subtly leaked, suggestions undermining her initiatives, alliances she had thought secure shifting imperceptibly. The realization that her environment was a chessboard, where Ethan had placed the pieces, became increasingly impossible to ignore. Victoria's temper flared in private, her frustration mingling with a growing sense of vulnerability. One evening, after a particularly vexing negotiation that ended with her proposals quietly redirected without confrontation, Victoria returned to their shared penthouse, her steps heavy with fatigue and resentment. Ethan met her in the kitchen, a glass of water in hand, his expression calm and unperturbed. "Rough day?" he asked casually, as if unaware of the subtle battlefield that had unfolded. Victoria's eyes narrowed, a mixture of fury and incredulity churning inside her. She wanted to accuse, to demand explanations, but the control he wielded was so quiet, so complete, that words felt insufficient. Instead, she sat silently, her mind racing through every interaction, every decision, and every whispered conversation that hinted at alliances she had not noticed. The sense of betrayal was not personal in the traditional sense. Ethan had never deceived her with lies, but he had built a life and influence entirely separate from the one she believed they shared. The dissonance between perception and reality gnawed at her, fueling both anger and self-reproach. How had she failed to notice the power he wielded? How had her pride blinded her to the depth of his presence in every corner of her professional world? Victoria's insomnia worsened. Each night spent pacing the apartment, analyzing memos, emails, and subtle patterns in company behavior. She began to see the invisible threads Ethan had woven throughout their professional ecosystem, threads that reinforced his control, while maintaining the illusion of her authority. The emotional tension reached a tipping point. She was angry, frightened, and simultaneously fascinated by the mastery he displayed. Every thought of confrontation was tempered by the acknowledgement that any overt move might reveal her vulnerability, potentially undermining her reputation and influence further. In this precarious balance, the silent tension between them became almost unbearable. Words were few, glances loaded with meaning, and the presence of unseen influence a constant pressure. Victoria understood, more clearly than ever, that she was no longer operating in the straightforward world of deals and recognition she had believed herself to command. She was navigating a labyrinth, and Ethan had been its unseen architect all along. By the time night fell, Victoria sat alone in the dim glow of her office, the city lights reflecting off glass and steel. The mixture of anger, awe, and betrayal churned inside her like a storm, unresolved yet undeniable. Ethan's quiet authority had transformed their world, and Victoria faced a painful truth. Power was never merely visible, and control was often exercised in silence, behind closed doors, and beyond perception. The tension was no longer external. It had rooted itself firmly in her own heart, preparing the stage for confrontation, revelation, and the inevitable unraveling of trust. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation, the glittering lights reflecting off polished floors and crystal chandeliers. Victoria Hale walked in, poised and polished, the embodiment of confidence she had cultivated for years. She smiled at cameras, greeted colleagues, and delivered a speech rehearsed to perfection. But beneath the practiced composure, a subtle tension gnawed at her, an unacknowledged awareness that some forces were shifting beyond her control. Ethan Greyson remained by her side, calm and composed, his presence almost imperceptible to the audience. The media cameras flashed, and executives murmured polite greetings. Yet there was a quiet undercurrent, a tension in the air that Victoria could not place. As she spoke about the $600 million deal, outlining the company's vision and her strategic achievements, she noticed glances exchanged across the room, subtle nods, almost imperceptible smirks, and the quick exchange of confidential whispers among partners made her uneasy. Something was off, though she could not yet define it. The turning point came when Ethan stepped forward, requested the floor with a courteous nod, and began to speak. His voice was calm, precise, and authoritative, a stark contrast to Victoria's dynamic, performative tone. He spoke of projects, partnerships, and strategic investments, citing data and statistics that Victoria had never publicly mentioned. He referenced deals under her purview and highlighted initiatives where his quiet oversight had ensured success. Each revelation punctured the careful image Victoria had projected, exposing cracks in the narrative she had built for herself and her audience. Victoria's heart sank with each statement. The audience responded with polite applause and murmurs of acknowledgement, but the undercurrent of recognition was unmistakable. Ethan was the unseen architect of much of the success Victoria had assumed belonged entirely to her. Her achievements, once celebrated with pride, now felt hollow, like stage props in a performance orchestrated by another hand. She felt the eyes of investors, journalists, and colleagues upon her, their expressions a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and subtle judgment. Panic rose within Victoria, a tightness in her chest as words she had prepared seemed inadequate, irrelevant. She wanted to interject, to reclaim control of the narrative, but each attempt faltered against Ethan's composed and undeniable authority. The subtle mastery with which he presented facts and insights made it clear to all present that he had been the true force behind the empire she thought she controlled. Her mind raced, grappling with humiliation, disbelief, and the sharp sting of betrayal. After the event, Victoria retreated to the quiet of her apartment, the city lights below mirroring the turmoil within her. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed alien, a woman she barely recognized, confident yet hollow, ambitious yet exposed. She replayed the moments of the conference repeatedly, dissecting every glance, every word, every subtle exchange, each reinforcing the stark reality of Ethan's hidden power. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow. The empire she had prided herself on leading was, in essence, under his control. Shame and frustration mingled with a creeping sense of vulnerability. Victoria had been blindsided not by malevolence, but by oversight. Her perception had been limited, her assumptions faulty, and her understanding of her husband superficial. The public nature of the revelation amplified every emotion, forcing her to confront not only Ethan's abilities, but also her own misjudgments. Questions spiraled in her mind. Had she ever truly known him? Could she rebuild her career and reputation after this exposure? Was her identity, so closely tied to success and recognition, still intact? The silence of the penthouse apartment pressed down on her, the weight of public scrutiny and private betrayal merging into a single, inescapable truth. She was forced to acknowledge the depth of Ethan's influence, the breadth of her own ignorance, and the fragile nature of power built on appearances. The night stretched long, each hour a reminder that confidence without insight was fleeting, and that recognition by the world did not guarantee understanding of the forces that shaped it. By dawn, Victoria remained awake, staring at the skyline as if seeking answers among the towering buildings. The humiliation lingered, sharp and unrelenting, yet within it flickered the faintest spark of resolve. If power could be exercised in silence, if influence could be hidden yet undeniable, then perhaps understanding it was the first step toward reclaiming agency. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenge and introspection. But Victoria knew one truth with piercing clarity. She had seen the depth of the man beside her, and now, she must decide whether to confront it or continue living in its shadow. The tension in the apartment was palpable as Victoria stood in the living room, the city lights casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ethan sat in the armchair opposite her, calm, almost serene, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. Victoria's hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the pent-up frustration, anger, and confusion that had built over weeks of revelation and humiliation. "I need to understand, Ethan," Victoria began, her voice steadier than she felt. "All of it. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why keep all of this power and influence hidden while we acted like equals in the open?" Ethan's gaze met hers, unwavering, patient. "Victoria, I didn't keep it from you to deceive you," he said quietly. "I kept it hidden because I wanted you to see beyond appearances, to understand that real power isn't announced at celebrations or flaunted at parties. It's cultivated in silence, with discipline and foresight. I wanted you to recognize it for yourself, not just believe in what I said or did." Victoria's anger flared. "So all this time, I've been... What? Naive? A fool? You let me play a part in your world without truly knowing it, without giving me the chance to actually participate." Her voice cracked, a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to watch my career crumble while you quietly manipulated everything behind the scenes?" Ethan leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "I knew you would feel that way, and I understand why. But my silence was never meant to diminish you. It was to teach, to reveal the distinction between power as perception and power as substance. You've built much, Victoria, but you've done so, focusing on visibility. I wanted you to realize the difference between being seen and being effective." The room was thick with unspoken tension. Victoria's chest heaved as she fought to maintain composure. "Do you realize how betrayed I feel? You've been sitting there, letting me stumble, letting me fail in ways I never imagined, all while you just watched? Is that love? Or is it control disguised as lesson?" Ethan's expression softened, tinged with regret and vulnerability. "It is both. I love you, Victoria. But love alone cannot teach you to see the truth of a situation. And yes, there is control. Because without it, the stakes we're dealing with our careers, our company, our lives, would be disastrous. I wanted you to confront reality, to understand the landscape we navigate. I didn't want to shield you, not anymore." Victoria sank into the sofa, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Her chest ached from anger, from betrayal, from the raw exposure of her assumptions. Yet beneath that tumult, a flicker of comprehension began to burn. Ethan's approach, though harsh and disorienting, forced her to reevaluate her own understanding of ambition, influence, and the dynamics between them. "So, all this time, you weren't just hiding power from me," she murmured, voice tinged with awe and bitterness. "You were testing me. Testing us?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his tone measured but sincere. "I needed you to see that success isn't about who is applauded, who stands in the spotlight. It's about who shapes the outcome, who navigates the undercurrents, who makes the right moves unseen. And you, Victoria, you've proven capable. Even if it took confrontation, even if it took humiliation, to make you understand that." The realization hit her like a sudden storm. Everything she had believed about their marriage, their partnership, and her own competence shifted. The anger remained, sharp and unrelenting, but it was now fused with understanding. She saw Ethan not as a rival, not as a manipulator, but as a guide through the complex, often invisible corridors of power she had underestimated. Victoria's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "I hate that it took me so long to see it. I hate that it had to hurt this much. But I see it now. I understand you, Ethan. In ways I never did before. And I want to learn, really learn, how to navigate this with you, not against you." Ethan's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Then, we start from here, Victoria. With honesty, with awareness, and with the recognition that power is not always obvious, but it is always consequential. If we approach it together, we can face anything." The room was silent, the weight of truth settling between them. No words could undo the weeks of tension, humiliation, and revelation. But in that quiet, charged space, something shifted. Victoria realized that understanding the man she had married and the reality of their world was far more complex than she had ever imagined. And yet, in that complexity, there was the first hint of reconciliation, respect, and a renewed path forward. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the cityscape below. Victoria Hale stood silently, looking out over Manhattan, the skyline, a mosaic of ambition and power, reflecting her own journey through revelation, humiliation, and understanding. The weeks of turmoil, confrontation, and self-reflection had left their mark, shaping a woman who now understood that strength and authority extended far beyond appearances and accolades. Victoria turned slowly, finding Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression calm yet attentive. There was no tension now, no subtle battle of wills. Only the quiet acknowledgement of shared truth. "Good morning," he said softly, a hint of warmth threading through the formality. Victoria nodded, a small smile touching her lips. The weight of past pride and frustration had eased, replaced with a clarity she had not known she could achieve. "I've been thinking," Victoria began, her voice steady, "about everything, about what happened, about us, about how I saw power, and how I see it now." She paused, gathering the right words, realizing that this moment of honesty required courage as much as reflection. "I understand that true influence isn't just about public recognition or financial success. It's about insight, patience, and responsibility. And I need to carry that forward. In my work, in my life, and in us." Ethan's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, offering no judgment, only presence. "You've learned much, Victoria," he said. "It hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been painless. But you've seen what's behind the curtain, the subtle structures, the unseen decisions, the weight of consequence. That understanding is power in itself, and power tempered with empathy and humility. That's rare." Victoria nodded, the truth of his words settling deep within her. For the first time, she recognized the value of restraint, reflection, and the responsibility that came with authority. Her previous victories now seemed incomplete, without the awareness of unseen forces and the acknowledgement of others' contributions. She had believed her career and public image were the ultimate measure of success. But now she realized that wisdom, patience, and self-awareness were equally, if not more, important. The silence between them was gentle, a mutual recognition of shared growth. Victoria felt a sense of liberation. She hadn't anticipated the freedom that comes from understanding, from accepting reality without resistance. There was still pride, yes, and ambition, but it was no longer a blinding force. It had been refined by insight, tempered by experience, and illuminated by the truth of her husband's quiet power. I also understand, Victoria continued, that forgiveness isn't just for others, but for myself. I misjudged. I overlooked. I assumed. And yet, I survived it. And I can grow from it. I want to build on that, not against it. Her gaze met Ethan's, steady and unwavering. I want us to move forward, aware, honest, and not in shadow or competition, but together. Ethan extended his hand, an invitation rather than a gesture of dominance. Then we move forward, together, he said, with honesty, with awareness, and with respect for the power and responsibility we both carry. Our past has shaped us, but it does not define us. What we choose now that defines everything. Victoria placed her hand in his, a symbol of reconciliation and renewed partnership. In that simple gesture, years of tension, misunderstanding, and hidden dynamics found a delicate resolution. The lesson was clear. True authority was not in domination or public recognition, but in perception, wisdom, and empathy. True partnership required trust, respect, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. As the day unfolded, Victoria returned to her office with renewed perspective. Meetings, negotiations, and strategic decisions no longer felt like performances to impress, but opportunities to exercise discernment and integrity. Her team noticed a subtle shift. Confidence tempered with awareness, decisiveness balanced with humility. It was a new Victoria, forged from confrontation, truth, and acceptance. Evenings brought the couple together, in quiet conversation, reflection, and planning. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic reconciliation. Only the ongoing work of understanding each other, of balancing ambition with compassion, and of navigating the intertwined worlds of personal and professional life. In this space, Victoria discovered the profound lesson that had eluded her before. That power and success, without insight and empathy, were fragile. And that love, real love, required both honesty and courage to endure the complexities of life. As night fell, the city lights twinkled below, a living testament to ambition, struggle, and hidden truths. Victoria and Ethan stood together by the window, hands intertwined, facing a future defined not by ego or illusion, but by clarity, acceptance, and the shared knowledge of what it truly meant to wield power responsibly. And in that shared silence, Victoria felt a peace she had never known, a profound understanding of herself, her husband, and the path they would navigate together.